She is standing in a clearing in the Montana wilderness, wet to the waist, a branch in both hands, and a man with a spade bleeding at her feet. This is not where the story ends. This is where it was always going. It began 6 weeks earlier with a death certificate slid across a dinner table, the man she had traveled 2,000 miles to marry dead 3 months before she arrived. And the man who forged his letters wore his name and has just driven her 2 hours into the tree. He's with a shovel tied to his bag. She came to Harlan Creek with $50 and a borrowed black dress. She built the case that would destroy him page by page in secret in the dark. This is that story. The story does not begin where you might expect. It does not begin with a sunrise over the Montana Rockies, or with the sound of a train whistle cutting through frozen air, or with a woman standing on a platform looking hopeful into an uncertain future. Those are the beginnings of other stories. Better ones perhaps, easier ones certainly. This story begins with a dress, a black wedding dress, and the woman wearing it has not chosen it out of romance or rebellion or any of the reasons a woman might choose to arrive at her own wedding in the color of mourning. She has chosen it because it is the only dress she has, because the landlady pressed it into her hands at 5 in the morning in the gray Boston cold while the cab waited outside and creditors were already beginning to circle the building like patient birds. "It belonged to my late husband," the landlady said. "He was a decent man. I hope yours is too." Clara Ashford took the dress. She did not have time to hope for anything yet. She had a train to catch. Now 6 days later, she stands in a third-class car somewhere in the vast silence of Montana and looks at herself in the small cracked mirror above the washstand. The dress is black silk over black cotton with small buttons at the wrist that she has learned to manage alone. It fits her well enough. Her mother would have called it elegant. Her father would have called it practical. Neither of them is alive to call it anything, which is the particular fact that has delivered Clara Ashford to this mirror, on this train, in this territory she has never seen and cannot yet imagine surviving. She is 26 years old. She has $50 sewn into the lining of her wool coat. She has a bundle of letters in her traveling bag tied with blue ribbon read so many times the paper has gone soft as cloth. And she has underneath everything the kind of determination that does not announce itself, the quiet, load-bearing kind, the kind that does not look like courage until much later when someone thinks to look back. Outside the window, Montana is erasing itself. Snow falls in thick curtains across a landscape so vast it makes her feel, for the first time in her life, genuinely small. She has grown up in Boston, where the world is compressed into blocks and buildings in the constant sound of other people living their lives at close range. This is different. This is a kind of silence she does not yet have a word for. It presses against the glass like something alive. The train lurches. She catches the edge of the washstand. In the mirror, a woman in black looks back at her with steady eyes. She does not look like a bride. She thinks exactly like what she is, a woman traveling a very long way towards something she is not entirely certain of, dressed for a funeral she has not yet attended. She does not know yet how accurate that image is. To understand how Clara Ashford came to be on this train in this dress, headed toward a town called Harlan Creek in the Montana Territory in the winter of 1878, you need to understand something about the arithmetic of desperation. Not the dramatic kind, not the desperation of Gothic novels where women faint and storms arrive, and everything is gesture and symbol. The real kind, the kind that lives in numbers. Her father, Edmund Ashford, was a school teacher. He taught reading and arithmetic and a little geography to the children of Boston's working poor for 31 years in a schoolroom that smelled of chalk and damp wool, and the particular hopefulness of children who have not yet learned to be otherwise. He taught Clara alongside them and then beyond them, and then she began teaching alongside him before she was 15. He was a good man in the way that quiet men are good steadily, without announcement, in ways that only became visible after he was gone. He died of paralysis in September of 1878. He was 63 years old. His last words to Clara were an apology for the debts she did not know existed, for the landlord she would have to face for leaving her alone in a city that had very little use for unmarried women with no family and no money, and no particular skill that anyone was willing to pay for at a living wage. The creditors arrived the morning after the funeral with the efficiency of men who had been waiting patiently. The debts were real. The options were not many. Clara paid what she could with the small savings from 3 months of taking in sewing, which left her with enough for the rent through January and nothing after that. The landlord's name was Harold Creed. He was 49 years old and had a smile that never quite reached his eyes, the kind of smile that is actually a negotiation. He mentioned on 3 separate occasions across 2 weeks that there were arrangements he could imagine that would make the question of rent considerably less pressing. He said it gently each time, almost kindly, in the way of a man who believes he is offering something rather than demanding it. Clara understood him perfectly. She slept with a hat pin in her hand for 7 nights and began making inquiries. The Western Settlement Ladies Agency occupied the second floor of a building on the corner of Winter and Broad Streets, above a printer's shop that smelled of ink and turpentine. The woman behind the intake desk was brisk and professional and asked Clara's age, her education, her domestic skills, and whether she had experience with livestock. Clara answered honestly on all counts. She was 26, educated beyond what was typical, capable of cooking and managing a household, and had never in her life touched a livestock animal of any kind. The woman wrote this down without apparent judgment. The match came within 9 days. His name was Thomas Holt of Harlan Creek, Montana Territory. He owned a copper mine that his father had built and a white house with shuttered windows looking west toward the mountains. And he was, according to his application to the agency, seeking a companion rather than a servant, a woman capable of independent thought who was not frightened of solitude or hard winters. The letters began arriving 2 weeks after the match was confirmed. They were not what Clara expected. She had imagined something practical, a list of household requirements, perhaps, or a description of the property, or a formal accounting of what she could expect in terms of material provision. What came instead were questions. He asked about her father's library. He asked what she thought about education in the territories, whether schools could work in small mining communities, whether children learned differently when they had never seen a city. He asked about the last book that had genuinely surprised her, and whether she thought surprise was an underrated quality in literature. These were real questions, questions that expected real answers, questions from a man who was actually curious about the answers. She wrote back. He wrote back again. Over 6 weeks, a correspondence accumulated that felt carefully guardedly, without allowing herself too much like the beginning of something genuine. His handwriting was careful, his grammar impeccable, his humor dry and understated in a way that reminded her painfully of her father. The last letter said, "I seek not a servant, but a companion. Come to Harlan Creek, and we will build something real." Clara folded that letter, placed it with the others in their blue ribbon bundle, went to the agency and bought a one-way ticket west. She sewed $50 into the lining of her coat, her emergency fund, her arithmetic of last resort, and boarded the train on a gray December morning with her leather satchel and her carpet bag and the black dress that was the only wedding dress she had. She has been on this train for 6 days. She is almost there. She does not know that the man who wrote those letters has been dead for 3 months. The train arrives at Harlan Creek Station at 4:30 in the afternoon, when the light is already failing and the snow has thickened to the point where the platform is barely visible from the window. Clara gathers her things with deliberate care, the same care she has applied to every action since Boston, the careful economy of a woman who cannot afford to lose anything. She checks that the letters are in her bag. She checks that the $50 is still in her coat. She straightens the black dress and pins her hair and takes 3 measured breaths. Then she steps out onto the platform. The cold is a physical shock. Montana winter is not the cold she knows from Boston. That cold is merely unpleasant, a social inconvenience, something that drives you indoors and makes you grateful for fires and thick walls. This cold is geological. It settles into the spaces between your ribs and makes itself at home. It is the cold of a place that does not particularly care whether you survive it. 8 people are on the platform when she arrives. 7 of them look at her dress, not with curiosity, with something else, something Clara cannot immediately name, a collective adjustment, a small social recoil like people instinctively stepping back from a flame. One woman older in a heavy shawl makes the sign of the cross quickly and looks away. A man near the station house removes his hat, then seems to reconsider and replaces it. Clara stands still and lets them look. She has learned not to respond to looks she cannot explain. The 8th person walks toward her. He is tall and broad, through the shoulders wearing a good wool coat with a fur collar that speaks of money without shouting it. His hat is pulled low against the snow, shadowing most of his face. What she can see is the jaw square and carved the kind of jaw that looks like a decision in the eyes. Pale blue, the color of thin ice over dark water. They move from her face to her dress and back again, and in that movement, she catches something. A calculation, an assessment being made and completed. "You must be Clara Ashford," he says. Not a question. "Yes." She produces a smile. It feels slightly wrong on her face, too eager, like a word slightly mispronounced. "And you are Thomas Holt." The pause that follows is very small, half a second perhaps less. Most people would not notice it. But Clara has spent 3 years reading the silences of a dying man, learning which pauses meant pain and which meant sleep and which meant he was deciding whether to tell her something difficult, and she has become expert at the texture of pauses. This one has the particular weight of a decision being made. "That is correct," the man says. She believes him. She will remember this moment for the rest of her life, the quality of the late light, the smell of pine smoke and coal from the station stove, and the precise shape of a lie she did not recognize as a lie because she had not yet learned to look for it in that particular face. He takes her bag without asking. She lets him, grateful genuinely for one less weight to carry. He leads her across the platform to a wagon hitched to 2 dark horses, and she climbs up into the seat, and the horses begin to move. And Harlan Creek opens around them, gray and cold and smaller than she had imagined. She tries conversation, she asks about the mine. He answers in brief, correct sentences that give her the information without inviting further inquiry. She mentions the library, the small lending library for minors' children, that he had described in his letter of October 15th, the passage she had found particularly revealing of his character, his desire to build something lasting and educational in this rough country. He frowns very slightly. A quick contraction, gone almost before it appears. "The library," he repeats. "Yes, you wrote about it quite movingly. You said you wanted the children of the men who built the mine to have access to the same books their fathers never had." A pause that is slightly too long. "Yes, of course." Clara turns to look at the town passing by the wagon. She stores the pause away in the part of her mind where she keeps things she does not yet understand. The house, when they reach it after 40 minutes of travel through pine forest and snow-covered road, is more beautiful than she expected. Large and white, with green shutters, a wide covered porch, smoke rising in a clean line from the chimney. Inside, dark wood furniture, thick Turkish rugs, oil lamps with etched glass shades that throw warm light across everything. It is the house of a man who has made money and spent some of it carefully on comfort. She looks at the bookshelves. There are 2 of them floor to ceiling, flanking the fireplace in the main room. They are empty. Not recently emptied, the dust beneath them is undisturbed, settled into a smooth, even layer, the dust of absence that has been accumulating for some time. Books do not leave dust patterns like that after a week. After a month, perhaps. After longer, certainly. She does not ask about the shelves. She files it. Supper is served at 7. Roasted beef potatoes, carrots, a bottle of red wine, open between the settings. The man she is calling him Thomas in her mind, the name she has been building a mental picture around for 6 weeks, sits across from her and eats with precise economical movements. He pours wine for both of them and raises his glass. "To new beginnings," he says. She raises hers, drinks a small sip, sets it down. They eat in silence for several minutes, and Clara uses the silence to do what she does best: observe. The way he holds his fork, the way his eyes move to the window and then back to the table with the regularity of a man monitoring something. The way he has positioned himself with his back to the wall and a clear line of sight to the door, which is not the seating arrangement of a man relaxed in his own home. It is the seating arrangement of a man who has learned to be careful. She is constructing a list of small wrongnesses. The pause at the station. The library he seems to have forgotten. The empty bookshelves. The posture of vigilance at a dining room table in his own house. None of these things individually mean anything. Together they form a pattern she cannot yet name. She sets her fork down. She is going to say something about the wedding arrangements, about the minister, about the practical business of the next few days. She has been rehearsing this conversation in her head since Billings. "There is something I need to tell you," the man says. His voice has changed. Still controlled, still smooth, but something has shifted in its register, an underlying note low and final like a door closing somewhere in a large house. Clara sets her hands in her lap. Yes, the production takes 30 seconds. He reaches into his jacket, removes a folded document, places it on the table, and slides it across to her with one finger. She unfolds it with hands she makes still by force of will. It is a death certificate. Thomas James Holt, date of death, September 15th, 1878. Cause of death, accidental fall from horse. The room does not spin. The room does not tilt. Clara Ashford sits very straight in her chair and looks at the document for a full 10 seconds, reading every word, and then she looks up at the man across the table. Thomas was my brother, the man says. He might be discussing a business arrangement. He might be reporting on the price of copper. His voice contains nothing that suggests he finds this moment unusual in any way. He died 3 months ago. I found your letters in his things. I read them. I continued writing. A pause. You had already made arrangements. You had no one waiting for you in Boston. It seemed inefficient to cancel. The silence that follows is the longest Clara has ever sat inside. You impersonated your dead brother, she says. The flatness of her own voice surprises her. For months, you signed his name. I did. That is fraud. Yes. He picks up his wine glass, takes a slow, unhurried sip, sets it down. I am Vincent Holt, Thomas's brother and the sole heir to this estate. The house, the mine, the land, everything that matters in Harlan Creek belongs to me now. He looks at her with those pale blue eyes. You have no money for a return ticket. The next eastbound train does not run until April. Between now and then, Montana winter is not survivable without shelter and provisions, neither of which you have. You arrived on the promise of letters and nothing else. He stands. He buttons the top button of his jacket with 2 precise movements. You will maintain this house. Cook clean, keep things in order. In return, you will have shelter and food through the winter. In April, if you still wish to leave, I will provide the train fare. He walks to the door of the dining room. He pauses there without turning around. Or you may try your luck in town. I understand the saloon is always looking for new girls. He goes upstairs. She hears his footsteps on the stairs, the measured rhythm of them unhurried, certain. Then a door opening and closing. Then silence. Clara Ashford sits alone at the table with the death certificate of the man she came to marry and the untouched wine glass of the man who has replaced him and the remnants of a meal she no longer wants to finish. She allows herself 1 minute of fear. She counts it. 60 seconds of sitting with the full weight of what has happened, the distance she has traveled, the people she has left behind, the complete and catastrophic wrongness of this room, this house, this man. 60 seconds exactly. Then she stands. She clears the table. She washes the dishes in the kitchen, her hands moving in the cold water with automatic precision. She climbs the stairs to the small room she has been shown and locks the door and wedges a chair under the handle and places her sewing scissors under the pillow. She lies down in the narrow bed and stares at the ceiling. Her father's voice in her memory is very clear. When you are surrounded, do not look at the walls. Look for the gaps between the stones. She has $50 in her coat lining. Not enough for a ticket, not enough to start over, not enough for anything obvious, but enough for something if she can determine what. She begins to calculate. 3 weeks pass with the slow grinding rhythm of a clock that has almost stopped, but not quite. Clara learns the architecture of Vincent Holt's control, the way you learn the layout of a house in darkness, by moving carefully and remembering every time you find the edge of something. The rules accumulate without being stated. The coffee must be strong but not bitter, a distinction never explained, punishable by a silence so cold it leaves marks. The fire in the main room must not go out before 9 in the evening and must not be lit after 10 in the morning. A regulation of comfort that serves no practical purpose she can identify, enforced purely because it can be. She is not to leave the house without him. She is not to engage in extended conversation with anyone in town. She is not to look at other men for longer than courtesy requires, and courtesy in Vincent Holt's accounting requires considerably less than she might have thought. She learns to read the signs. The particular set of his jaw when he comes home from the mine in a certain mood. The way his right hand opens and closes very slightly when he is calculating something. The specific quality of silence denser than ordinary silence, pressurized somehow, that means she has committed a transgression she has not yet identified. She does not yet know how bad it will get. She will know soon. On a Tuesday in early February, Vincent takes her into town. Harlan Creek in winter daylight is a collection of wooden buildings arranged along a single main street, functional and bleak, the kind of town that exists because something valuable was discovered in the ground nearby and will cease to exist when it is no longer valuable. The general store is run by a man named Walter Burns. Middle-aged, steel-rimmed glasses, the kind of face that has spent decades looking at people with genuine interest in retaining what it sees. He smiles at Clara when she comes in. A real smile, warm, uncomplicated, the first genuine human warmth she has experienced since stepping off the train. "You must be the new arrival," Walter Burns says. "Are you settling in all right, miss?" It is a simple question. Common courtesy, the kind of thing people say to each other in small towns because community requires the practice of small, regular kindnesses. Clara opens her mouth to answer. Vincent's hand closes on her upper arm. Not hard enough to hurt yet. Hard enough to communicate that the architecture of permission in this town works differently than she might have assumed. Hard enough to be a sentence. Outside on the step in the cold wind off the mountains, he releases her. His voice is very quiet. "I told you, you do not speak to other men without reason." He asked if I was settling in. "That is not a reason." She says nothing. She stores it. Vincent goes back inside to complete the purchase. Clara stands in the cold and looks at the main street of Harlan Creek. A few people moving between buildings bundled against the weather. A blacksmith shop with smoke coming from its chimney. The sheriff's office with a faded star painted on the door. And across from the general store beside the livery stable, a man she has not seen before. He is tall and lean in the particular way of someone who has done physical work for a long time. Not a laborer's bulk, but something rangy and economical muscle in the right places. Nothing wasted. He wears a blue work shirt faded to a soft, particular shade beneath a brown leather vest, the color of good saddle leather, aged to a comfortable darkness. He is checking the rigging on a buckskin horse with hands that know what they are doing, hands that move with the confidence of complete familiarity. His hat is pulled low. She can see a scar from here, a pale line running from his left temple down to the jaw, the track of something that came fast and was argued with. He moves without apparent awareness of being watched. There is something in the quality of that movement, its ease, its lack of vigilance, that she finds standing in the cold with her arm still carrying the memory of Vincent's grip, almost painful to look at. She cannot remember the last time she moved that way, without monitoring herself, without accounting for the space around her. The store door opens. She looks away before Vincent appears. They load the wagon. Clara's handed a box awkward, heavier than it looks. She adjusts her grip. Her boot finds a rut in the frozen road. It falls. The box tilts, and she tries to catch it and fails, and it goes down the contents, scattering across the dirty snow. Flour, coffee, a bottle of molasses that shatters dark liquid, spreading in a slow stain across the white. She looks at what she has done and waits for the world to end. "You clumsy fool." Very quiet, not angry. Anger would have been in some ways easier to manage. This is different. This is the voice of a man for whom anger is a tool he has already put away, something more considered taking its place. The slap comes before she has finished processing the words. Her head snaps sideways. She goes to her knees. The frozen road comes up very fast, and then she is on it, on her hands and knees in the dirty snow, tasting blood from where her teeth have cut the inside of her cheek, and the world is ringing at the edges. "Get up," she tries. "Ma'am." The voice comes from somewhere above and to her left, not Vincent's voice, not anyone's voice she has heard before. Deeper, steadier, gentle in a way that surprises her because gentleness is not what she is expecting from any quarter of this town right now. She looks up through the hair fallen across her face. The man from the livery stable is standing 3 feet away. The blue shirt, the brown vest, the hat pulled low. He is not reaching for her, not moving toward her, not doing anything aggressive in any direction. He is simply standing there at 3 feet with his hands loose at his sides and his brown eyes the color of creek water in autumn. She will think later, the color of something that moves steadily, without being hurried, fixed on her face with a question in them that is not the reflexive concern of a bystander, but something more specific, more direct. "Ma'am, are you all right?" 3 words. A question so ordinary, it should not have the weight it has. And yet Clara Ashford, kneeling on the frozen main street of Harlan Creek, Montana, with the taste of blood in her mouth and her knees aching from the impact with the ground, cannot immediately process it. Because it has been, she counts backward quickly, 8 weeks since anyone asked her that question. 8 weeks since anyone treated her welfare as a thing that required inquiry. She is fine, Vincent says from behind her. This is a private matter between a man and his wife. The man in the blue shirt does not look at Vincent. He is still looking at Clara. I heard you, he says. His voice has not changed in register or temperature. It is simply level in the way that certain rivers are level, not slow, not calm exactly, but moving with the consistency of something that has decided on its direction and is not inclined to be redirected. But I was asking the lady. She is my wife. What happens between us? I reckon it stops being private when it happens in the middle of Main Street with 30 people watching. Now he looks at Vincent. It is a particular kind of looking, the way a man looks at a situation he is assessing, rather than reacting to measuring distance and weight and possible outcomes. You want to put that hand on somebody, you put it on somebody who can put it back. Clara pushes herself to her feet. Her legs are unsteady. Her face is burning on the left side where the impact landed. She is aware of being watched by the man in the blue shirt, by Vincent behind her, by the people in the doorways and windows who have been there this whole time, watching with the carefully neutral expressions of people who have decided that watching is the most they can offer. Please, she says. She directs it at the man in the blue shirt, and her voice is steadier than she expects, though it costs something to keep it that way. Please just go. You will only make it worse. He looks at her. Something moves in his face, not pity, she will think later. Pity would have been easier to set aside. What she sees is recognition. The particular look of someone who has been inside a version of what she is inside right now and understands its geometry from the inside. Worse than what I just watched, he asks, quiet enough that only she can hear it. She has no answer for that. Vincent calls for the sheriff. Grady Finch emerges from his office across the street, a man of 50, with the face of someone who has spent years choosing the comfortable wrong thing over the uncomfortable right one, wearing the expression of a man who has already decided what he will do before he finishes crossing the road. The man in the blue shirt is asked to move along. He looks at the sheriff for a moment. Then he looks at Clara. He touches the brim of his hat toward her, a small, quiet gesture, the kind that does not demand anything in return. I hope you find what you're looking for, ma'am. He goes back to his horse. He mounts with the easy grace of someone who has done it 10,000 times. As Vincent takes Clara's arm and steers her toward the wagon as they pull away from the store, she looks back once. The man is still there, still on his horse, watching the wagon go without moving, without looking away. The wagon turns at the end of the street and he disappears from view. Vincent drives in silence, the specific silence that means she will hear about this again when they are somewhere private and there are no witnesses. Clara sits beside him and keeps her eyes on the road ahead and thinks with a clear, methodical part of her mind that refuses to stop working regardless of circumstances about the man in the blue shirt who did not look away. 3 words. That was all. 3 words and the steady refusal to pretend he had not seen what he saw. The kitchen floor later is cold against her cheek. She does not know how long she has been on it, long enough for the light through the window to have changed. She takes stock in with her father's kind of practicality. This hurts, this does not, this is concerning, this will pass. Then she gets up. She makes her hands stop shaking. She starts the stove for supper. That evening in her room, she opens her notebook to a fresh page. Her father's handwriting, compact, precise. The accounting hand he had taught her for keeping records forms the first entries of what will become a document she thinks of privately as the ledger. February 7th. Left cheekbone, open-handed blow, swelling, no laceration. Cause given dropping supplies on Main Street. True cause being seen by a stranger. Estimation of severity moderate. Escalation since arrival consistent. She pauses, adds a second notation in smaller letters at the bottom of the entry. February 7th. Man in blue shirt and brown leather vest. Livery stable Main Street. Gar left temple to jaw. Asked if I was all right. Did not look away. She closes the notebook, slides it under the loose floorboard she found in the first week of cleaning, and said nothing about. Lies down in the narrow bed, listens to the house settle around her in the Montana dark. She does not sleep, but she thinks. That afternoon in the warm dimness of the livery stable, the man in the blue shirt pays for his horse's board and asks Pete Dawson, small, sharp-eared, the kind of man who notices things and stores them, without being asked about the woman in the black dress. Clara Ashford, Pete says without needing to think about it. Mail-order bride, came in December on the westbound. Poor thing. The man she's with, Vincent Holt. His brother Thomas was the one she came to marry. Thomas died back in September. Fell off a horse. Pete pauses, spits. That's what the sheriff's report says. Thomas Holt rode since he was 8 years old. The man in the blue shirt is not looking at Pete. He is looking at the horse, running his hand along the animal's neck, thinking something through. I watched him stay on a half-broken cavalry horse through the second day of the wilderness campaign in mud to the stirrups on 2 hours of sleep. He did not fall off horses. Pete Dawson is quiet for a moment. When he speaks again, his voice is careful in the way of a man choosing the exact right amount of truth to offer. In Harlan Creek, what's true is what Vincent Holt says is true. Sheriff Finch don't argue with him. The mayor don't argue with him. His family built the mine that built this town. He looks at the man in the blue shirt. You do well to keep moving, friend. Harlan Creek isn't healthy for people who ask questions. The man considers this. He picks up his saddlebags. He thanks Pete Dawson. He walks out into the cold main street and stands for a moment looking toward the edge of town where a white house is visible through the trees on a low-rise smoke coming from its chimney. He stands there for a while. Then he turns and walks toward the Cross House boarding establishment at the far end of Main Street. Edna Cross is 65 years old and has been reading strangers for 40 of them. She looks at the man who comes through her door. The scar, the worn vest, the way he stands with his weight distributed and his hands quiet, the posture of someone who has been in situations requiring careful choices and has survived them and makes her own calculations in the time it takes to set down her pen. His name is Reed Calloway. He needs a room. He might be staying a while. She gives him room 4 at the end of the hall and $3 a week and asks what brings him to Harlan Creek. He tells her Thomas Holt. They served together, 3 years 7th Cavalry. Thomas wrote to him in August, said his brother was dangerous, said if anything happened to him, Reed should come and make sure Vincent didn't destroy what their father had built. Thomas died in September. Reed has been moving toward Harlan Creek since October, handling business along the way slower than he should have been. Edna Cross sets her coffee cup down with a sound that is more deliberate than necessary. Thomas Holt did not fall off a horse, she says. No. And the woman he had lined up, that mail-order bride, she's in that house now, with Vincent. I saw what he did to her this afternoon. A silence. The fire crackles. Outside, the wind off the mountains has picked up, driving snow against the window in a low, steady percussion. Nora Holt, Edna says. She says it the way you say the name of someone who deserved better from the world and did not receive it. Vincent's first wife. Disappeared in the fall of 1873. They said she ran off. Said she was unhappy, couldn't take the winters left in the night. She pauses. Nora Holt had nowhere to run to. No family, no money, no friends outside this county. She had been here 5 years and she loved this place in the way people love things that are hard. She meets Reed's eyes. I saw Vincent digging on the northeast corner of the Holt property one night in October of that year, alone in the dark, with a lantern and a shovel. The room is very quiet. I should have said something then, Edna says. It is not quite an apology. It is the acknowledgement of a thing that has been lived with for 5 years, turned over and examined and set aside and picked up again. I was afraid of what would happen if I did. That fear is not something I am proud of. Reed Calloway nods. He does not offer absolution because that is not his to give. I need to write a letter, he says, to a man in Helena. Edna Cross pushes a piece of paper and a pen across the counter. The desk in room 4 has better light, she says. Supper is at 6. That night in room 4 at the end of the hall, with the wind pushing at the window and the lamplight making the shadows move. Reed Calloway writes to Arthur Webb, United States Marshal, Helena, Montana Territory. He writes about Thomas and what he suspects. He writes about the woman in the black dress and what he saw on Main Street that afternoon. He writes, come to Harlan Creek with whatever authority and resources you have. I believe there are two murders here, and a third one being arranged with considerable patience. He seals the envelope. He sets it on the desk. He sits for a while in the chair by the window, looking out at the darkness of the Montana night, at the faint yellow square of the White House window visible through the trees on the rise above town. Somewhere behind that window, a woman he does not know is lying awake in the dark, calculating. He is doing the same. He came here too late for Thomas. He has not yet decided what that failure has made him or what he owes in response to it. But he knows this. There is a woman in a house on a hill who asked him to leave, who said he would only make things worse, who is clearly right about a great many things and may or may not be right about that one. He came too late once. He intends to make different choices this time. Outside, the snow falls on Harlan Creek in thick, silent curtains, burying the town in white, covering the frozen mud of Main Street and the shuttered windows of the general store, and the tracks of a wagon that drove away that afternoon with a woman in a black dress who was counting something he could not see. She is counting days, 117 of them between tonight and the 15th of April, when the circuit judge comes through on his quarterly rotation. Between tonight and the first real chance at anything resembling justice that this town has seen in a very long time. 117 days. She has survived 8 weeks already. She intends to survive 17 more. The first Tuesday in February arrives the way all important days arrive in winter, without announcement, without distinguishing itself from the days before it, gray and cold and indifferent to what is going to happen inside it. Vincent leaves for the mine at 6:30. Clara watches him go from the kitchen window, tracking the wagon until it disappears into the tree line. Then she waits. 45 minutes, which is the time she has calculated, it takes for him to reach the mine dismount, begin inventory, and become sufficiently absorbed in it to make a return unlikely. She has been calculating this for 2 weeks the same way her father taught her to calculate the load-bearing capacity of a wooden bridge. You measure everything. You can measure account for the variables you cannot, and then you decide whether to cross. She crosses. Cross House sits at the far end of Main Street, a 7-minute walk in ordinary weather 5 if she moves with intention. She moves with intention. The cold is savage this morning, the kind that makes breathing a conscious decision, and the black dress under her coat is not warm enough for Montana February, but she has stopped factoring comfort into her decisions. Comfort is a luxury reserved for people who have more options than she does. The sign above the door reads, "Rooms, fair rates, no unnecessary questions." She pushes inside. Reed Calloway is in the sitting room. He stands when she enters, not the automatic social reflex of a man following convention, but a deliberate choice, a physical acknowledgement that she is the one who controls the distance in this room. She notices that. She notices everything now out of necessity, but she notices that in particular. Close up in the morning light from the eastern windows, she takes inventory the way she has learned to take inventory of everything. 32, 33 years old. The blue shirt worn to a comfortable softness from many washings. The brown leather vest with wear at the elbows, the kind of wear that accumulates over years, not months. The scar runs from the left temple diagonally to the jaw, a pale seam that catches the light at certain angles. His eyes are brown and steady, and they are looking at her with the careful attentiveness of someone who has decided to see clearly and not look away from what he sees. He does not offer his hand. He waits. "Miss Ashford," he says. "Clara," she says. "Just Clara, and I need your help." She tells him everything in 11 minutes. She has been rehearsing this version in her mind for 3 days, the essential account stripped of everything that is not useful, ordered for maximum clarity. The impersonation, the forged marriage certificate, the ledger she has been keeping, the $50 that is not enough, the window of the mine inventory on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, the only margin she has, the circuit judge, April 15th. He listens without interrupting. When she finishes, there is a pause, not the uncomfortable pause of someone searching for the right response, but the brief silence of someone taking a full accounting before he speaks. "Thomas wrote to me in August," he says. "He said Vincent was planning something. He didn't know exactly what, but he said he was afraid of his brother in a way he hadn't been before their father died. He asked me to come check if anything happened to him. He knew he was in danger. Thomas had very good instincts." A pause. Something moves behind his eyes, controlled quickly. "I didn't come fast enough. By the time I got his letter and cleared some work I shouldn't have let delay me, he was already gone." He looks at her directly. I'm sorry for that. You're here now, she says. That's what matters. It is the practical thing to say. She means it practically. But she watches something in his face shift slightly when she says it. Not relief exactly, something adjacent to it, the particular expression of a man who has been carrying a weight and has just been told without ceremony that the weight can be set down for a moment. She asks about the scar. He tells her a robbery 6 years back, a knife that came faster than he expected. He says it the same way you describe weather you've ridden through, not a wound to be displayed, just a thing that happened and is now behind him. She looks at him for a moment. You said you came too late for Thomas. You said it like a man who has said it to himself many times. He is quiet long enough that she thinks he will not answer. 1875, he says finally. Winter, there was a fever moving through the valley, the kind that comes fast and doesn't negotiate. I was out 3 days moving cattle to higher ground before the passes closed. When I got back, he stops, starts again. My wife Margaret, my son James, he was 4 years old. He looks at his hands. The neighbors said Margaret waited for me before she'd let anyone move them. She thought I was coming. A pause that contains everything that cannot be said about what it means to be waited for and not arrive. I was half a day's ride away when it mattered. I was there for the burying. Clara says nothing. There is nothing adequate to say, and she knows it. That is why I came when Thomas wrote, Reed says, and why I stayed when I found what I found. A man can only be too late so many times before late becomes the thing he is. He looks at her. I would rather be the other thing. She understands now the specific weight in the way he moves through this town. Not the weight of a man carrying guilt, the weight of a man who has decided what guilt requires of him and is in the process of paying it. Then she says, what can actually be done? Grady Finch is on Vincent's payroll. Even if the marriage certificate is fraudulent, I have no way to prove it without accessing his desk. Territorial law gives a husband considerable authority even in cases of... She stops, recalibrates. The law here does not help me. Not yet. We build the case in layers, Reed says. He leans forward slightly, elbows on knees, the posture of a man thinking through a problem with genuine engagement. The violence, you've been documenting it. How did you know? Your father was a school teacher. You're precise, observant. People who grow up around documentation learn to document. He looks at her steadily. Keep building the record. Every incident, every detail. Then we go after the certificate. Then we go after what happened to Thomas. You think he killed his own brother? I knew Thomas Holt for 3 years. I know what he was capable of and what he was not. What happened to him in September was not an accident. A silence. The fire in Edna's sitting room crackles. From somewhere in this back of the house comes the small domestic sound of Edna Cross moving around a kitchen with the particular efficiency of someone who has been running a household for 40 years. She is not in the room. She is also, Clara suspects, not entirely not listening. A circuit judge, Reed says. April 15th, I've written to Arthur Webb. He's a U.S. Marshal, a friend, someone I trust to do this correctly. By April, with the right evidence, we can make an arrest that Sheriff Finch cannot undo, regardless of whose payroll he's on. April is 11 weeks away. I know. I don't know if I have 11 weeks. He looks at her for a long moment, not flinching from the statement, not reassuring her with a comfort he cannot guarantee. You've survived 8, he says, and you've done it with more clarity than anyone I've watched survive anything. I can't promise you the outcome, but I can tell you this from this morning, you are not doing it alone. Clara looks at the man across the sitting room, this stranger with another man's grief in his posture, who came too late for his friend and is trying to determine what that failure requires of him. She makes a decision. I need a camera, she says, small enough to conceal. I know where he keeps the marriage certificate. 3rd drawer of the desk in the study. If I can photograph it, you have proof of the forgery. Reed looks at her for a long moment. I'll have one by Thursday, he says. Something in the room has settled. Not comfort, nothing about the situation offers comfort, but something more structural than that. The particular solidity of 2 people who have decided to trust each other, not because it is safe, but because it is necessary. She stands to leave. At the door, she turns back. I have to have lunch ready before he returns, she says. If it's cold when he gets home, this morning wasn't worth anything. Reed looks at her. Do you want me to apologize for the circumstances? No, I want you to understand the priorities. From the back of the house, not quite quietly enough. She's right, Edna Cross says. Leave the apologies for people who have time for them. Clara allows herself something that is almost a smile. Then she goes back out into the cold. 3 weeks pass. They are the most dangerous 3 weeks of Clara Ashford's life, and she does not know it yet, which is probably the only reason she survives them intact. She falls into the rhythm of building. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, she goes to Cross House when she can, sometimes only for 20 minutes, sometimes for the full stretch of Vincent's inventory schedule, and she adds pages to the ledger, and she trades information with Reed, and she begins to understand incrementally the shape of what she is building. The ledger grows. February 7th, the incident on Main Street. February 11th, a shove into the doorframe because she did not yield the hallway fast enough. Bruising on the right shoulder, possible minor strain. February 14th, a slap because she spoke without being addressed during supper. February 19th, the worst incident yet. She made the mistake of picking up a book she found in the back of a kitchen cabinet, an old agricultural almanac probably left from before Thomas died, and was reading it at the table when Vincent came home unexpectedly early from the mine. He did not shout. He never shouted. He took the book from her hands, looked at it once, and threw it into the fire. Then he explained quietly that reading at the table was another thing she would not be doing in his house. When she picked herself up from the kitchen floor later, she went upstairs and added the entry to the ledger with her father's careful hand. Then she lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the book burning in the fireplace and the empty bookshelves in the main room and what those two things together said about the man who lived here. Thomas had filled those shelves. Thomas, who had asked Clara about the last book that genuinely surprised her. Thomas, who had wanted a lending library for minors' children. Thomas, who was 7 months dead and buried, and whose absence had left nothing in this house except its opposite. She has been at Cross House 8 times since that first Tuesday morning. She has not told Reed about the burning book because there are some things she needs to keep for herself, not because they are secret, but because they are hers, and she cannot afford to give everything away. On the 9th visit, Arthur Webb is there. He is 52, broader through the shoulders than Reed, with gray threaded through dark hair, and the stillness of a man who has spent long careers listening to people explain themselves and learn to wait for the part they don't say. He is not wearing a marshal's badge. He is dressed like a traveling salesman, which is deliberate, and he has been in Harlan Creek for 4 days without Vincent Holt knowing he is here, which is a more significant achievement than it sounds. He treats Clara with a formal courtesy that it takes her a moment to identify respect. He calls her Miss Ashford. He asks permission before sitting. He takes notes while she speaks and does not look at her injuries when she describes them. He treats her as the primary witness in a case which is precisely what she is. In Edna's cellar, he has developed the photographs from a camera slightly too large for Clara's purposes, which is why Reed has arranged the smaller one for her. The photographs of the will that Edna has been holding, the real will of Cornelius Holt, the one that leaves everything to Thomas, are spread on the table. This document, Arthur says, touching the edge of one photograph, establishes motive. If we can add the forged marriage certificate, we have fraud. If Dr. Whitmore will testify, who is Dr. Whitmore? Claire asks. Arthur looks at her. The coroner who examined Thomas Holt's body in September. He's no longer in Harlan Creek, moved to Billings 3 weeks after the death, which I now think was not a coincidence. He reaches into his coat and removes a letter. I wrote to him. This is his reply. He reads it aloud. It is careful language, the language of a man who has been frightened for months and is still frightened, but has decided that being frightened is no longer sufficient reason to stay silent. The body of Thomas James Holt, Dr. Whitmore writes, presented injuries consistent with a fatal fall, broken neck, skull fracture from the impact. But it also presented bruising across the chest in upper arms, consistent with a physical altercation occurring within the hours before death. And there was a contusion at the base of the skull that the sheriff's report attributed to the fall, but which Dr. Whitmore believed and believes still preceded it. He kept private notes. He is prepared to testify. The room is very quiet when Arthur finishes reading. He was killed, Clara says. It is not a question, it is the final piece of something she has been assembling since December, arriving in its proper place with the particular satisfaction and horror of a truth that has been known in the bones before the mind accepts it. That's what the evidence supports, Arthur says carefully, which gives us a basis for a murder charge. But we need witnesses to the quarrel, to the relationship between the brothers, to anything that puts Vincent in proximity to Thomas on the day of the death. I have two men, Edna Cross says from the doorway. She has been there for most of this conversation in the way that Edna is always present, substantially quietly, without requiring acknowledgement. Jake Pruitt and Clem Dorsey both work at the mine. Both saw Vincent and Thomas arguing the night before Thomas died, badly enough that they remembered it, badly enough that they were frightened by it. She pauses. They're frightened of what happens if they testify. They're more frightened now after what I told them about Nora Holt. Nora Holt, Arthur says. Tell me. And Edna tells Amar what she told Reed, the disappearance in October of 1873, the digging she witnessed on the northeast corner of the property, the particular quality of a woman's absence when there is no reasonable explanation for where she went. Arthur Webb writes for a long time. When he stops, he looks at the three of them, Clara, Reed, Edna, with the expression of a man who has been building cases for 30 years and knows at this stage which ones are real. The will, he says to Edna, you've had this since when Cornelius Holt brought it to me in 1875, 6 months before he died. He said he didn't trust the bank and he didn't trust Vincent with the knowledge of what was in it. He trusted me. She says this without pride as simple fact. He was right to. The will of Cornelius James Holt dated May 3, 1875. The entirety of the estate, the copper mine, the White House, the land goes to Thomas. Vincent receives a cash settlement. The document is legal. The document is notarized. The document means that when Thomas died, Vincent Holt inherited nothing he was entitled to by right, only by deception. He killed his brother for a mine, Clara says. And a house, Reed says. Something in his voice is very quiet. And because Thomas was going to give it all away to a workers' education fund, everything their father built. He looks at the window. Thomas told me about it in his last letter. Said Vincent found out about the plan, and he used the word livid. Said it was the worst he'd ever seen him. The motive assembles itself in the room like a figure stepping out of shadow, a man who believed he had been cheated by birth order, by a father's preference, by the arbitrary cruelty of inheritance law, and who finally acted on that belief with the cold, methodical patience of someone who has been planning for a very long time. 3 weeks, Arthur says. I need 3 more weeks to get the judge here. I've already sent a telegraph to accelerate the schedule. If we can hold the evidence secure, if we can keep Vincent from knowing how close we are. He's already suspicious, Reed says. They all look at him. I've watched him watch Crosshouse. He doesn't come close. He's careful. He doesn't want to be seen watching, but he notices who goes in and out and when. He's been noticing for at least a week. He looks at Clara. He doesn't know what's happening here, but he knows something is. Clara says nothing. She is calculating. She does not tell them yet about the camera still hidden under the bars in her room. She is waiting for the right Thursday morning. She is waiting because some things require patience, and patience is the one resource she has in sufficient supply. She goes home. She makes lunch. Vincent returns from the mine at his usual hour, eats without speaking, retires to the study. She washes the dishes. She goes upstairs. She takes the ledger from under the loose floorboard and adds the morning's information in small, careful letters that her father would have recognized. She sleeps 6 hours. She wakes at 5. She begins again. The Thursday comes the same as every other Thursday, gray light through the kitchen window. Vincent's boots on the stairs at 6:15, the wagon pulling out at 6:30 exactly. The only difference is what she has hidden under the loose board beside the stove. Vincent leaves at 6:30, the mine inventory schedule unchanged. Clara waits 45 minutes. Then she goes to the kitchen, lifts the loose board beside the stove, and removes the camera Reed passed through the gap in the back fence 3 days ago in 45 seconds of near darkness and absolute silence. She has been practicing. The mechanics of the camera, the precise distance from the subject, the need to hold level, the counting of the exposure she has rehearsed mentally 200 times. In her room, she has practiced the motion of taking the camera from its concealment, moving to the study, positioning it, and returning until the sequence is as automatic as washing dishes. The study lock, a pin tumbler standard hardware. Her father locked the school supply cabinet with an identical mechanism and taught her the workaround when she was 14 because he kept forgetting his key and could not afford to replace the chalk twice in 1 month. The wire she has been bending and testing for 4 days works in 4 minutes and 22 seconds. The study smells of tobacco and the bay rum Vincent applies each morning. Dark furniture, heavy curtains, the kind of room that would have held books on its shelves if books were still welcome here. On the wall, the Holt family portrait. 2 brothers standing before the White House, young the photograph, perhaps 15 years old. Thomas faces the camera, directly open-faced, the posture of someone who assumes goodwill. Vincent stands a half step behind him, and to the left, the way a shadow stands present, unavoidable, not quite in its own place. And in the background, in the doorway of the house, a young woman. Not looking at the camera, looking at Vincent with an expression Clara has been wearing for 3 months and recognizes the way you recognize your own reflection. The watchful, calibrated alertness of someone managing a situation that cannot be named. Nora Holt, in the only evidence that she ever existed. Clara looks at that face for 3 seconds. Then she opens the third drawer. The certificate is there. Beautiful in the way of excellent forgeries, official looking, seal in the corner, 2 witness signatures sufficiently illegible, the name of the presiding minister rendered in confident cursive. Reverend Gerald Stone, a name she has never encountered in any church, any registry, any mention by any person in Harlan Creek. A name that exists in this document and nowhere else. Signed December 10th, 1878, the day she arrived. He had this prepared before she stepped off the train. She places the document on the desk surface. She positions the camera at the distance Reed specified. She checks that the text is legible in the available light from the window. Click, 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 click. 4 exposures from 4 angles, each sound filling the silent house like a stone dropped in still water, expanding outward in circles she cannot see. She replaces the document in the drawer at the precise angle she found it. She locks the drawer. She wipes the desk surface with her apron. She locks the study door behind her. She is in the hallway 12 feet from the top of the stairs when she hears the wagon in the yard. The sound of it, the particular creak of that wagon's left rear wheel that she has memorized over 2 months, arrives like something physical. She stops. Everything stops. Vincent is home early. She has approximately 30 seconds before he reaches the door. Clara does the only available thing. She moves. Quietly and quickly down the hallway, not running, not making the sound of running, to her bedroom. Camera under the mattress pressed flat against the board beneath the quilt, smoothed back into perfect alignment. She checks the quilt. Checks again. Then she straightens and steps back out into the hallway and is standing in her own doorway. Expression neutral, apron on, hands visible at her sides when she hears his boots on the stairs. He stops at the top of the stairs and looks at her. "Why are you up here?" he says, changing the bed linens. She hears her own voice from a slight distance, the way you hear your voice in a large room. Steady, completely steady. "It's Thursday. I always change them Thursday." He looks at her, looks at the hallway, looks at the study door. He tries the study door. It opens. He goes inside. Clara stands in her own doorway and counts. 1, 2, 3. The study is not a large room. A man who knows where everything is kept can assess it in under a minute. She counts to 15, and then to 20, and then the door opens, and Vincent comes out holding a leather ledger, the account book she has seen him carry to and from the mine on days when there is financial work to review. He looks at her once. The particular look, measuring not yet suspicious, still in the register of ordinary household monitoring. "Have lunch ready when I return," he says. He goes back downstairs. She hears the front door close. The wagon moves away. Clara walks into her bedroom and closes the door and sits down on the floor with her back against the bed and waits for her hands to stop shaking. It takes 14 minutes, longer than she expected, but the camera is under the mattress. The photographs are taken, and when the shaking stops, what replaces it is not relief, but something colder and more useful, the knowledge that she is capable of doing what needs to be done in the time available without being seen. Her father's voice in the back of her mind says evidence. "You are building a case. Build it properly." She gets up. She starts lunch. 2 days later, in Edna's cellar, Arthur Webb develops the photographs in the chemical bath Clara has watched him use twice before. The images surface in the developer fluid, with the unhurried certainty of confessions, every word of the forged certificate rendered in clear legible detail, the fake reverend's signature, the false seal, the name Clara Ruth Ashford joined by fraud to Vincent James Holt on a day she had not yet arrived in the state. Excellent work, Arthur says. He says it professionally without excess. Clear eye, steady hand. My father taught me to pay attention to details, Clara says. He said the devil lived in them, and so did salvation. Arthur looks at the photographs for a long moment. Both true, he says. The case is almost complete. The forged certificate, the real will, Dr. Whitmore's testimony, the ledger of 42 pages. Jake Pruitt and Clem Dorsey, who have agreed to testify if a federal marshal is present to ensure their safety. The physical evidence from the northeast corner of the Holt property, which Arthur has quietly begun the process of requesting authorization to excavate. Almost. Not quite. The week after the photographs, Clara is in the general store on a Thursday afternoon when she becomes aware that she is being watched. Not by anyone she can see. Watching Walter Burns is behind his counter doing inventory. Two other customers are examining bolts of cloth near the window, but by someone somewhere whose attention she can feel with the particular sensitivity she has developed over the past months. The sensitivity of an animal that has learned that attention can be a precursor to danger. She finishes her purchases. She walks home. She is careful not to look around. That evening, Vincent comes home from the mine and goes directly to his study without eating supper, which is not his pattern. She hears the desk drawer open and close. Open and close again, then silence for 40 minutes. Then he comes out and eats supper in quiet, and his eyes on her across the table have a different quality than usual. Not the calculating warmth of a man managing something he controls, but the sharper, more attentive quality of a man reassessing something he thought he understood. She does not sleep that night. 3 days later, Arthur Webb comes to Reed in the room at Cross House with information he has gathered from a source he is not yet ready to identify. Billy Burns is 17 years old, the son of Walter from the general store, a good-natured and thoroughly guileless boy who took on part-time work at the Holt mine in January to earn money for something or other. He talks to the mine foreman the way 17-year-old boys talk to adults. They are trying to impress freely with the genuine belief that conversation is harmless. The foreman has been asking occasionally about the woman in the black dress, whether she comes into town much, what days, who she talks to. Billy has been answering. He is not a spy. He does not know he is doing harm. He is 17 years old, and no one has taught him yet that casual information in the wrong hands is a weapon as effective as any other kind. He knows she's been here, Reed says. He says it flatly because there is no other way to say it. He doesn't know what we've built, but he knows something is happening. How much time do we have? Arthur asks. I don't know, but less than we did yesterday. That afternoon, Reed goes to the back fence of the Holt property, the section where the pine trees provide cover, and the alley behind the woodshed creates a blind spot, and waits. He has been doing this twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. At the time Clara takes out the ash from the kitchen stove, the only outside task she performs alone. He cannot get close enough to speak. But she has learned to look, and when she looks, she has learned to read what he shows her. Today he holds up 2 fingers, then points north. The signal they worked out 2 weeks ago. Arthur is here, 2 days meet if possible. She sees it. She gives no sign that she has seen it. She takes the ash bucket back inside. Vincent calls her into the study that evening. He is sitting behind the desk, which he almost never does when speaking to her. He prefers to stand, which gives him the height and the advantage of movement. Sitting means he has something to say that requires the framing of furniture. Means he has arranged this moment deliberately. I want to have a conversation, he says. Sit down. She sits in the chair across the desk. She folds her hands in her lap. She waits. My lawyer in Helena, he says, has confirmed that regardless of the circumstances of our marriage, the certificate itself constitutes a legally valid union under territorial law. This means that whatever you have been collecting, documenting, or otherwise attempting to arrange, he pauses just long enough, does not change your legal position. She says nothing. I am also aware, he continues, that there is a federal marshal in town, Arthur Webb from Helena. I know why he is here. He opens the desk drawer, closes it, a small, unhurried gesture, the kind meant to communicate that he controls the contents of that drawer and everything in it. I know about Reed Calloway. I know about Edna Cross. I know you have been visiting Cross House on Tuesday and Thursday mornings during my mine inventory. He looks at her across the desk. I know considerably more than you have calculated. She keeps her hands folded. She keeps her face composed. She keeps her breathing even. These things require effort she does not let show. Here is what I am offering you, Vincent says. He could be discussing the price of lumber. Judge Crawford arrives in 2 weeks. You will appear before him and you will confirm that our marriage was entered into voluntarily, that you are well provided for, and that the men interfering with our household Calloway Webb have been doing so without cause. He holds her gaze. You will do this, and everyone walks away from Harlan Creek unharmed. Calloway goes back to wherever Calloway came from. Webb goes back to Helena. Edna Cross keeps her business license. And if I don't, Clara says, then I will present the judge with a case for spousal insubordination and collusion with federal agents in a fraudulent interference claim. Grady Finch will confirm whatever needs confirming. Jake Pruitt and Clem Dorsey will discover that their employment at my mine is contingent on their choices in the coming weeks. And Calloway, he pauses, will find that interfering in a man's household in Montana territory has legal consequences he may not have anticipated. I need time to consider, Clara says. Until tomorrow evening. She stands. She walks to the door. She is aware of him watching her from behind the desk with those pale blue eyes that contain absolutely nothing she can use. She goes upstairs. She locks her door. She sits on the bed in the darkness and looks at the wall opposite where the small, cracked mirror shows her a woman in a black dress sitting very still. She looks at the Holt family portrait she has kept in her memory since the morning in the study, Thomas facing forward Vincent in his shadow, and Nora in the doorway with her watchful eyes. Nora who disappeared, Nora who had nowhere to run. Nora whose absence was explained by a story that nobody believed and nobody challenged, because challenging Vincent Holt in Harlan Creek had consequences that outweighed the cost of accepting a convenient lie. She is not going to accept a convenient lie. She opens the loose floorboard. She takes out the ledger, 42 pages in her father's accounting hand, 42 pages of dates and times and causes and injuries recorded with the precision of a woman who was taught that evidence is the difference between a story and a fact. She looks at it for a long time. The lining is loose enough at the seam she opened and restitched 3 weeks ago for exactly this purpose. It holds. If tomorrow goes wrong, she will need the evidence on her body. She does not sleep. She lies in the dark with her father's pocket watch in her hand and counts the seconds until morning and thinks about what happens next and arrives before dawn at a decision. She is not going to wait for April 15th. She writes a note in the darkness by feel and memory, 3 words in her father's accounting hand on the back of a grocery list. She folds it as small as it will go and tucks it into the cuff of her sleeve. Tomorrow she will find a way to get it to read. Tomorrow everything changes. She does not know yet in which direction, but the direction when it comes will be of her own choosing. Outside, the Montana night is absolute and cold, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the window, the mountains stand exactly as they always stand, enormous, patient, indifferent to what happens in the small wooden houses at their feet. She is not indifferent. She is the opposite of indifferent. She is counting. The morning comes gray and cold and without ceremony, as all important mornings do. Vincent rises at 5. She hears him. She does not move. She listens to him dress, to the sound of water in the basin, to the particular rhythm of his boots on the stairs. Methodical and hurried, the footsteps of a man who has arranged his world to his satisfaction and expects it to remain arranged. She hears him in the kitchen, the stove, the coffee, the sound of him eating alone in the room below her, the clink of a cup set down the scrape of a chair. Then the footsteps return to the stairs. Her body goes very still. But they stop at the base of the stairs, not ascending, and she hears the sound she has not heard before, that at this hour the front closet opening and something heavy being moved and the closet closing again. Then the front door, the wagon, moving away in the gray pre-dawn toward the mine. She lies still for 1 full minute after the sound of the wagon disappears, counting, before she allows herself to move. She gets up. She dresses in the dark. The black dress goes on over everything else. The ledger is already inside the lining. The pocket watch, the pencil, the wire, these go into her coat. She goes to the window and looks at the gray street below, at Cross House at the far end of Main Street, with no lights in its windows, at the first suggestion of light beginning to separate the mountains from the sky in the east. She has one chance, one small window in which something she drops might be found by someone who knows what to do with it. She opens the window, lets the cold in, and drops the folded note into the snow below, small and white on white, almost invisible, almost nothing. Almost. She closes the window. Downstairs in the kitchen, she is starting the stove for breakfast when Vincent's footsteps return. She hears them outside on the porch, then the front door, and she is lifting the kettle when he appears in the kitchen doorway. He is wearing his coat, his hat, his traveling clothes, not his mind clothes. And in his hand, tied to the handle of the bag he is carrying, is a short-handled spade. "Get dressed," he says. "We're going to inspect the northern claim. I need you with me." Clara looks at the bag, at the spade, at the pale blue eyes in the face of the man who has replaced his brother, who buried his first wife in the dark, who has been patient for months and has just run out of patience. She understands everything in the time it takes to breathe in once. 5 minutes, she says. He closes the kitchen door. She dresses in the dark of the kitchen, not going upstairs, making herself work quickly, with hands she commands to be still. She has already taken everything she needs to take. She has already dropped the note. She has already done what she can. She opens the back door for the ash bucket, the one task she performs every morning, unremarkable routine, and in the 4 seconds she stands in the cold doorway, she looks across to the fence line where the pine trees make a shadow, and there is no one there. She closes the door. She picks up her coat. When Vincent opens the kitchen door, she is ready. They go out into the gray Montana morning together, and the wagon moves north out of Harlan Creek, and behind them in the thin snow below her window, a folded piece of paper lies waiting for someone to find it. 3-word. North. Come now, the world will depend on whether someone does. The road north out of Harlan Creek stops deserving the name within 2 miles. What begins as a packed dirt track becomes a suggestion, then a memory, then simply the absence of trees. A corridor through the ponderosa pine that someone traveled often enough to keep clear, though not recently enough to have left visible marks in the fresh snow. The wagon finds it by Vincent's memory alone. He does not need to look for it. He has been here before. Clara sits beside him and pays attention to everything. This is what she does instead of being afraid. Not because she is not afraid, she is afraid with the specific focused quality of fear that has been refined over 4 months into something almost useful, but because fear, if you give it the whole room, takes up all the space that thinking needs. Her father taught her this without knowing he was teaching it in the years of sitting beside his sickbed, learning to read his silences, and manage the household and make decisions that could not wait for someone steadier to arrive. She pays attention. Direction north-northeast based on the position of the mountains behind them and the angle of the early light beginning to separate the sky from the ridgeline. They have been moving for what she estimates is 40 minutes. The terrain has risen. They are in the higher foothills now, above the elevation of the town. She notes a distinctive formation to the west, 2 peaks close together, the left one slightly higher with the saddle between them, that catches snow differently than the surrounding slopes. She will be able to identify that formation from any direction. She notes the frozen creek they crossed at a sharp angle 11 minutes ago, the water visible beneath the ice as a dark suggestion. She notes the lightning-struck beginning at the junction where Vincent turned without hesitation, its split trunk dark against the snow. She notes that he turned without hesitation, which means this junction is familiar, which means this destination is known. She is building a map in the only space Vincent cannot search. He does not speak. He sits beside her with his hands on the reins and his eyes on the corridor through the trees, and his face carrying the particular expression she has come to know as his working face, not angry, not calculating in any visible way, simply occupied with something internal that has been decided and is now being executed. The expression of a man doing a job he has done before. The spade is tied to the side of the bag behind them. She can hear it occasionally, a small metallic sound, when the wagon hits uneven ground, a sound she will never afterwards be able to separate from the color of that morning's light. 2 hours into the journey, the trees open. The clearing is perhaps 30 meters across a rough oval of ground, bounded by dense pine on all sides. The kind of space that happens when a stand of trees grows around a rocky outcropping and the rock eventually weathers away, leaving a gap that nothing has filled. The snow here is undisturbed, clean, and even the surface unmarked except for the tracks of something small that crossed it in the night. A creek runs somewhere to the east, audible, but not visible, its sound muffled by the trees. The sky above the clearing has gone from charcoal to the particular gray-blue of a winter morning that is not going to become anything warmer than itself. No sun, no wind yet, though the tops of the pines are moving in a way that suggests wind is coming. Vincent stops the wagon. He ties the horses to a pine at the edge of the clearing with efficient, practiced movements. He reaches into the back of the wagon for the bag. He unties the spade. "Get out," he says. Clara gets out. Her boots find the snow, and she stands in the clearing and looks at the space around her with the methodical attention she has been applying to everything since the wagon left Harlan Creek. 30 meters. Dense trees, no passage visible except the way they came. Creek to the east. Rocky ground beneath the snow. She can feel the unevenness through the soles of her boots. Vincent walks toward her with the spade at his side. He stops 6 feet away, and then unexpectedly, he is still. He does not raise the spade. He does not speak immediately. He stands in the clearing in the gray morning light and looks at her with an expression she has not seen on his face in 4 months, something that exists in the same register as exhaustion, though it is not quite that. Something that has been carried a long time and has begun to show its weight. "You made this more complicated than it needed to be," he says. His voice is what it has always been controlled, measured, the voice of a man for whom emotion is a resource to be managed rather than experienced. And yet underneath it this morning there is a texture she has not heard before, as if the control is costing something it usually does not. "You could have stayed quiet," he says, "kept the house, gotten through the winter. In April, I would have let you go exactly as I said." Clara looks at him. "And if I had found out about Thomas, about Nora, about all of it?" He considers this as if it is a genuine question deserving a genuine answer. "You would not have found out," he says. "Not on your own. You didn't have the connections here, the history. You were new. You would have learned what I allowed you to learn." A pause. "Calloway changed that. I should have moved him along the first week." "Why didn't you?" A longer pause. "Because I didn't think a woman who arrived in a borrowed black dress with $50 sewn into her coat was going to be a problem I couldn't manage." He says it without contempt, with something closer to admission. "I was wrong about that." "Tell me about Thomas," Clara says. She says it because she wants to know, and because she has calculated that talking is better than the alternative while she is still 6 feet from the tree line. She does not say it because she thinks talking will save her. She says it because she intends to be the one who decides when talking is finished. Vincent looks at the mountains, visible above the pines, the two peaks to the west, the saddle between them holding its particular shape of snow. He looks at them for a moment as if he is remembering something located in that direction. "Our father built the mine," he says, "both of us. Not Thomas more than me. Not me more than Thomas. Equal parts. But our father decided that equal parts building something did not equal equal parts owning it. Thomas was older. Thomas was easier. Thomas smiled the right way in the right rooms, and people believed he was good, which he was, but so was I once in different ways that our father couldn't see. His voice has not risen, has not changed in temperature. He left it all to Thomas, house, mine, land, everything. For me, a cash settlement that would have lasted 3 years if I was careful. So you took it. Thomas was going to give it away." Something shifts in his voice, not anger, but the particular quality of a man describing an injustice he has rehearsed so many times it is worn smooth. "Everything our father spent his life building. Thomas had a planned workers' education fund, lending libraries for minors' children, redistribute the land to the men who worked it. Noble, very noble. And when it was done, there would have been nothing left. Nothing of what my father built would have remained." "You killed your brother to protect a legacy," Clara says. "And then you buried your wife in the corner of the property you inherited." The silence that follows is very long. "Nora understood what I had done," Vincent says. "She worked it out in the spring after Thomas died. She was going to tell someone." He does not elaborate. He does not explain or justify. He states it the way you state a fact of geography. Here is the mountain. Here is the river. Here is the thing that happened and cannot be unmade. Clara looks at the man in front of her. She has looked at him many times in 4 months across dining tables through doorways, in the dark of hallways before the lamps were lit. She has studied him the way you study a landscape you are trying to find passage through. And she has understood incrementally what he is: not a monster who arrived in the world this way, but a man who made choices, each one reasonable, seeming, in its moment, each one sealing off a little more of whatever he might have been otherwise, until the choices accumulated into this clearing, this morning, this spade. Understanding does not make it acceptable. Understanding is just the clearest way of seeing what you are dealing with. That explains it, she says. It doesn't excuse it. Something moves in his face. The faintest possible acknowledgement, the way a mountain acknowledges wind, present insufficient to change anything. He raises the spade. Clara runs. She does not run for the wagon. She does not run for the way they came, in which he knows better than she does. She runs for the creek she can hear to the east, because water is the one thing in this clearing that does not belong to Vincent Holt, and because she has been calculating the distance to the tree line for the past 12 minutes and knows she cannot reach it before he closes the gap. She makes 9 steps before his hand closes in her hair. The world reverses. She goes down hard, the frozen ground coming up faster than she can brace for the impact, driving through her palms and knees, the black dress tearing at the left knee. Pain radiates up through her wrists and hips and spine. She cannot breathe for 3 seconds. He stands over her. His breathing has quickened slightly, the only sign that this has cost him anything physical. He looks down at her with those pale blue eyes, and in them, she sees for the first time since December something that is genuinely emotional. Not regret, not hesitation. Something that is, she realizes, almost disappointment. "Stop making this worse than it needs to be," he says. He raises the spade. She rolls. The blade hits the frozen ground 6 inches from her left ear. She feels the impact through the earth beneath her, a shuddering in the bones of the ground. She does not pause to consider how close it was. She is already moving, not away from him this time, but at an angle, cutting toward the sound of the creek, using the momentum of the roll to get her feet under her before he can recalibrate. She runs. The creek bank arrives suddenly, a drop of 2 feet she does not see until she is already going over it, and then she is in the water. Montana mountain water in the second week of April has not yet decided whether it is ice or liquid. It is both simultaneously in the way of things that have not finished becoming themselves. It seizes her legs with a cold so complete and absolute it stops being a sensation and becomes a condition, a fact of her body, like gravity, like weight, like the requirement to breathe. The current is stronger than she expected. It grabs at the black dress, which is immediately and catastrophically heavy with water, pulling at her knees, at her thighs, trying to find her center of gravity and use it against her. She fights across it 22 steps that feel like walking through something that has decided to be solid, and reaches the far bank and gets her hands on the frozen grass and pulls. She is on the bank. She is standing. She is wet to the waist, and her hands are shaking with the cold that has gone past painful into something systemic, something her whole body is registering as emergency. But she is standing. She presses one hand against her ribs. The ledger is there, damp at the edges, but intact. Behind her, Vincent is in the creek. He followed her. She hears him before she turns, the sound of a heavier body in the water, the deeper disturbance of a man with more mass fighting the same current. He is slower. The water is thigh-deep for him, and the current wants him sideways. He is fighting it with the controlled efficiency of everything he does, but he is slower. He reaches the bank. He pulls himself out. He stands on the far side of the creek from her with a spade in his right hand and water streaming from his coat and his hat, and his pale blue eyes fixed on her with an expression she has not seen before in his face. Not anger, not calculation. Something simpler and older than either. The recognition of an equal arrived at far too late. Between them, a fallen branch. It is on her side of the creek. She has already picked it up. It is thick as a man's wrist, dried through the winter to a density that surprises her when she lifts it. Long enough, heavy enough. He looks at the branch in her hands, and something almost crosses his face. "What do you intend to do with that?" he asks. Clara Ashford stands on the bank of an unnamed creek in the Montana wilderness, with a dead branch in both hands, and her black dress soaked to the waist, and her father's watch in her coat pocket, and 42 pages of evidence against this man pressed against her ribs, and she thinks about all of it at once. Thomas Holt, who wrote Real Questions to a Woman He Would Never Meet. Nora Holt, who looked at Vincent from a doorway with eyes that saw what was coming and found no way out. Her father, Edmund, who taught her Greek and arithmetic and the load-bearing capacity of wooden bridges and how to keep records of things that matter. Reed Calloway, who came too late for his friend and decided that coming too late was not the same as not coming at all. She thinks about the first night in the house when she gave herself 60 seconds of fear and then got up and washed the dishes. She swings. The branch connects with his left temple. The sound of it travels outward across the creek and into the trees and comes back as echo, and Vincent Holt's eyes go wide. Not with pain, not yet, but with the specific shock of a man who has not in a very long time been on the receiving end of something he did not anticipate. His hand goes to his temple. Blood appears between his fingers, dark and immediate. He staggers. One step sideways, then he catches himself. Clara draws the branch back and swings again. He goes to one knee. She raises it for the third time. Don't! The voice comes from the tree line to the north, not Vincent's voice. Not any voice she expected from that direction, because she did not know anyone was in that direction, because she had not known if the note would be found, if anyone would read it, if anyone would come. Reed Calloway steps out of the pine trees. He is wearing the blue shirt and the brown leather vest, and he has a rifle in his hands at a carry angle that says he knows how to use it and is prepared to but would prefer not to. Behind him, Arthur Webb, with the particular bearing of a man who carries federal authority so long it has become posture. And behind Arthur, which is the detail, Clara's mind takes a full 3 seconds to process Grady Finch. Sheriff Grady Finch, wearing his star, moving with the careful gait of a man who has just crossed a significant internal distance and is not certain what he will find on the other side of it. Reed's eyes go to Clara first. They move across her, the wet dress, the branch in her hands, the split lip reopen the bruising at her temple, and something in his face does what it always does. When he looks at her and finds evidence of damage, it goes very still, the particular stillness of controlled response of a man who has learned to keep his reactions internal because external reactions in certain situations cost other people. How she says she cannot make the word into a sentence. Pete Dawson found the note, Reed says. He is moving toward Vincent, carefully, the rifle steady. He makes a delivery to the Holt house every Tuesday morning, eggs from the Pruitt farm. Found it on the ground below your window at 6, brought it straight to mine. He glances at her for 1 second. Edna knew the northern claim. She's known about it for years. He reaches Vincent and stands over him. Arthur had horses ready. We rode hard. Arthur comes forward with handcuffs. He handles them with the practiced efficiency of a man who has done this many times and understands that the physical act of restraint is a formality. The real work was done before the clearing. Vincent Holt does not resist. He kneels in the snow on the bank of an unnamed creek, and he lets Arthur take the spade from his hand, and he lets the cuffs close around his wrists, and he does not look at Clara. Grady Finch steps forward. His voice is rough in the way of something that has been stored for too long in an airless space. Vincent James Holt, he says, I'm arresting you under the authority of Harlan Creek for the murder of Thomas James Holt, the murder of Nora Holt, the attempted murder of Clara Ashford, fraud and unlawful imprisonment. He pauses. He looks at the ground for one moment, then back up. I should have said these words 5 years ago. I'm saying them now. He does not apologize directly. She sees it in the way he holds himself, a posture of a man who has set down a weight he has been carrying so long he has stopped noticing it and is now feeling what its absence cost him. Arthur and Finch bring Vincent to his feet and begin the walk back through the trees toward where the horses are tied. Reed stays. He walks to the bank of the creek. He is close enough now that she can see his face clearly in the morning light, the scar catching the first actual sun she has seen today, his eyes holding the particular steadiness of a man who rode 3 hours through pine forest in the dark and does not consider this unusual. He is not reaching for her, not moving toward her. He stands at a distance she can control, and he waits because he has understood from the beginning that this is how you stand beside someone who has been managing distances for 4 months. Are you all right? He asks. 3 words. The same 3 words. Still the same question, still carrying the same weight it carried on Main Street in February when she was on her knees in the snow and the world was wringing at its edges and no one else was asking. Clara Ashford looks at this man. She is wet to the waist and her hands are still shaking from the cold of the creek, and there is blood in her mouth again from the lips she cannot seem to keep from splitting open, and the branch is still in her hands because she has not thought to put it down yet. Yes, she says, and she means it. For the first time in 4 months, she says it, and she believes it, and the believing is its own particular kind of warmth, better than the fire in Edna's sitting room, better than the $50 in her coat lining, better than anything she has found in Harlan Creek, until this exact moment on this unnamed bank on this April morning. Arthur Webb, walking Vincent toward the horses, turns back for a moment. He looks at the scene, Clara with her branch, the creek behind her, the evidence of everything she did before anyone arrived. I rode 300 miles to help, he says, the tone of a man making an honest accounting. I see you didn't need much of it. Clara looks at him. You arrived in time to be a witness, she says. That's what I needed. Arthur considers this, nods. Fair enough, he says. He turns back to his prisoner. Reed almost smiles. It is not quite a smile yet, but it is the beginning of one. They bring Vincent Holt back through the trees to where the horses wait, and they ride south toward Harlan Creek, and the Montana morning opens around them, the sky lifting from gray to the pale blue of a day that has decided to be clear after all the mountains to the west, catching the early sun in long horizontal lines of gold and shadow. It is the first genuinely beautiful morning Clara has seen in this territory. She has been here since December. She has seen winter and cold and the particular cruelty of landscapes that do not care whether you survive them. This is different. This is the same land, the same mountains, the same enormous, indifferent sky, and it is entirely different. She rides back toward Harlan Creek with the evidence against Vincent Holt pressed against her ribs and her father's watch in her pocket and the memory of a branch connecting with the man's temple echoing in her palms, and she understands somewhere in the part of her that keeps accounts that the 60 seconds of fear she allowed herself on the first night were not wasted. They were the beginning of a calculation she has just finished. Judge Howard Crawford arrives on the afternoon of April 14th, one day early, because Arthur Webb's telegraph to Helena was marked urgent in the federal cipher, and the judge had learned over 30 years that urgent in a federal marshal's cipher means exactly what it says. He is 58 years old, gray-bearded, wearing the expression of a man who has seen nearly everything and stopped being surprised by it without stopping caring what he sees. He sets up court in the Harlan Creek Town Hall, which is the largest available room, and on the morning of the 15th, it holds 80 people, nearly every person in Harlan Creek. Families from the outlying claims who made the ride in the dark the night before so as not to miss it. 2 women from the boarding houses on the far side of town who have never before set foot in a municipal proceeding. Jake Pruitt and Clem Dorsey sitting in the second row with the careful posture of men who have made a decision they cannot unmake and are at peace with it mostly. Clara Ashford takes the stand on the first morning. She is wearing the black dress. Edna Cross offered her something practical and presentable, and Blue Edna has a gift for practical solutions to problems. Clara said no. She said it without elaboration because the elaboration would have been this: the dress came from Boston. It was on the platform at Harlan Creek Station on December 10th. It was in the dining room when Vincent Holt sat across a table and explained that her future was not her own. It was in the study when she photographed a forged document with hands she made stop shaking by force of will. It was in the creek on the morning of April 14th when she did what needed to be done before anyone arrived to help her do it. The dress is a witness. It deserves to be in the room. She speaks for 1 hour and 7 minutes. She does not falter. She does not lower her voice or soften a word or translate any of it into language more comfortable for the room. She speaks in her father's accounting voice, the precise stated causal language of a woman who was taught that evidence is the difference between a story and a fact, and the room listens with the quality of attention that large groups produce only when they are genuinely still. The ledger 42 pages entered into evidence. The photographs of the forged marriage certificate displayed authenticated by Arthur Webb's testimony about the development and chain of custody. The real will of Cornelius Holt presented by Edna Cross, who has carried it for 9 years, with the particular faithfulness of someone who understands that some things must be kept whether or not you can see their purpose yet. Dr. Whitmore's testimony comes by written deposition notarized in Billings read aloud by Arthur, in the careful voice of a man who wants every word to land where it is meant to land. The bruising inconsistent with a fall, the contusion that preceded it, the notes he kept in private in fear for 7 months. Jake Pruitt takes the stand. His hands shake. His voice shakes. He tells what he saw on the night of September 14th, the argument between Vincent and Thomas Holt. The violence of it, the specific image he has not been able to put down since Vincent's hand at Thomas's collar. Thomas stumbling back against the fence post of the mine yard. Clem Dorsey confirms it. His voice shakes less than Jake's. He has been carrying this longer and has had more time to decide what he thinks about the carrying. On the second morning, 3 women stand up. They are not called. No one has subpoenaed them or prepared them or coached their testimony. They simply stand one after the other. Ruth Hadley first, and then 2 others whose names Clara does not know, but whose faces she has seen in the windows of Harlan Creek's Main Street on the day she passed through it, the faces of people who were watching, who had always been watching, who had chosen watching because the alternative cost more than they thought they could pay. Ruth Hadley speaks for 11 minutes. She does not speak about Clara specifically. She speaks about what it means to live in a town where a particular kind of silence has been purchased at a particular kind of price, and what it costs the people who maintain it, and what it feels like when someone finally refuses to pay. The other 2 women follow. Judge Crawford listens to all 3 with the attentiveness of a man who understands that testimony comes in more forms than the ones the law formally recognizes. On the 3rd morning, he delivers the verdict. Vincent James Holt, guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Thomas James Holt and Nora Holt, guilty of attempted murder, Clara Ashford. Guilty of fraud and unlawful imprisonment. The sentence is death by hanging, to be carried out within 30 days at the Territorial Facility in Helena. The forged marriage certificate of December 10, 1878 is declared void and without legal effect. Clara Ashford has been, since her arrival in Harlan Creek, a free woman held against her will. The will of Cornelius James Holt is certified as authentic and legally binding. The estate passes to Territorial Trust Administration to be managed according to its terms, which include, among other provisions, the establishment of an educational fund for the children of mine workers in Harlan Creek County. Thomas Holt's plan, deferred by 7 months of violence, is going to happen after all. When the bailiff leads Vincent out of the room, he passes within 4 feet of Clara. She is still in her chair at the witness table. He looks at her once. It is the same look he gave her in the clearing, the recognition too late of something he miscalculated. She looks back at him with the steady level attention she has been applying to everything since December, and she does not look away, and she does not move, and she does not give him anything he can take with him. He is taken out of the room. She sits for a moment in the sudden strange quiet of a thing being finished. Then she stands. She straightens the black dress. She walks out into the April sunlight of Harlan Creek. Vincent Holt is executed on the 28th of April at the Territorial Facility in Helena. 2 men from the Harlan Creek mine witness it, not Jake Pruitt or Clem Dorsey, but 2 others, older men, who knew Thomas, who understood that some endings need to be seen by people who knew the beginning. Grady Finch resigns his position the day after the verdict. He writes 2 letters, one to the territorial governor, a full accounting of his conduct over 5 years, detailed and honest in the way of a man who has stopped trying to manage the version of himself that exists in other people's minds. The second letter is to Clara. It is brief. It does not ask for anything. It states what he did and what he did not do, and when he finally did the right thing, and why it took as long as it did. She reads it once, sitting by the window in her room at Cross House, and then she folds it and sets it in the fire and watches it become ash. It is enough that he told the truth. The truth is enough. The rest is his to carry. Billy Burns spends most of the spring at Cross House fixing the porch steps that have needed fixing for 2 winters, and the section of roof above the east rooms that leaks when the snow melts too fast. He does not ask to be thanked, and he is not thanked, and he seems to understand that this arrangement is correct, that some debts are paid not in acknowledgement but in work, and that the work is its own accounting. Walter Burns speaks to his son at length. Clara does not know what was said. She knows that Billy works quietly and well and looks at the ground when she passes, which is the appropriate response to his situation. Edna Cross opens 2 new rooms. On the door of one, in her precise handwriting on a piece of board, she has painted white, "For women who need shelter." No charge required. The sign is up within a week of the verdict. Clara asks her once why she did not do it sooner. Edna is quiet for a moment in the way she is quiet when she has thought about something a great deal and arrived at an answer she does not particularly enjoy. "Because I was afraid," Edna says. "And then I watched a 26-year-old woman walk into a courtroom in a black dress and say the truth out loud in front of 80 people. After that, a sign on a door did not seem like a very large thing." She does not make an announcement about it. She does not explain it to anyone. She simply hangs the sign and goes back to her other work in the manner of a woman for whom the right action is self-evident and the approval of others is a luxury she stopped requiring sometime in her 40s. Arthur Webb returns to Helena with a case file that will be cited in 3 subsequent territorial proceedings involving spousal fraud and the legal status of mail-order marriage contracts. He does this work without particular ceremony or ambition about it. He is a man who does the job in front of him because it is in front of him, which is the most reliable kind of virtue there is. 2 weeks after the trial, on a morning in early May, when the snow has been gone long enough from the lower elevations that the first real green is showing through the brown Montana earth, Clara Ashford sits on the porch of Cross House in the late afternoon and looks at the mountains. They are different without snow. Not less beautiful differently, beautiful in the honest, unglamorous way of things that do not need weather to improve them. Brown and ochre, and the tentative green of new growth, enormous and layered and real. Reed comes out of the house and sits on the step below her, which puts him slightly lower than her eye level, which she has learned over the months since February is his preferred geometry when he is going to say something he has been thinking about for a while. He turns his hat in his hands. "Helena," he says, "not quite a question. Francis Merritt's school, women's literacy, and continuing education." She looks at the mountains. "My father wanted me to teach. I couldn't afford the training in Boston. The territorial school operates differently." She pauses. "I have the $50. It turns out it was enough, just not for what I thought it was for." Reed nods. He is quiet for a moment in the particular way that is not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, but of someone choosing carefully. "I'd like to write to you," he says. "I move around, but I write when I'm somewhere long enough to post a letter, and I'd like to write to you if you'd be willing to read them." He looks at her. "I'm not asking for anything except the possibility that you'd write back." Clara looks at Reed Calloway. She looks at the blue shirt worn to its particular softness, the brown vest, the scar in the afternoon light, the steady eyes that have never once looked at her as a problem to be managed, or a situation to be handled, or property that belonged to someone else. The man who asked the right question in February and stayed in Harlan Creek when it would have been considerably easier to leave. "You can write," she says. "I may not always answer promptly. I intend to be occupied." "That's all right. And if you find yourself in Helena in the front," she keeps her voice carefully measured. "Francis Merritt's school has a roof that needs significant work before winter. I'm told you're competent with that kind of project." He looks at her for a moment. Then he smiles. The real version, not the controlled, partial expression she has seen him deploy in public when he needs to seem agreeable. The actual smile of a man who did not know he was going to smile until it had already happened. "I know a thing or two about roofs," he says. The morning of May 2nd arrives with the quality of mornings that have decided to be good at it. Clear sky, cold air, carrying the smell of pine and snowmelt, the mountains to the west lit in early gold. The kind of morning that Montana produces occasionally without announcement, as if to remind you that it has always been capable of this and has simply been prioritizing other things. The station is 6 people, in a wagon and a locomotive building steam. Edna Cross stands beside Clara without speaking, which is her best and most consistent form of love. Walter Burns has brought a package of books, his own, from the store's small lending shelf pressed into Clara's hands this morning, with the instruction that they are for her students and not to argue about it. She did not argue. Jake Pruitt and Clem Dorsey are there, which she did not expect. They stand at the edge of the platform with their hats in their hands, and they do not say anything because there is not anything to say that would be sufficient, and they seem to know this. Reed stands apart from the others by a few feet, which is where he always stands present, accessible, not crowding the situation with his presence. He is holding a small envelope. He puts it in her hand without ceremony. Read it when you're past Billings, he says. She puts it in her coat pocket beside her father's watch. She turns to face him. She does something she has not done since Boston. She extends her hand. He takes it, and they shake once firm the handshake of two equals who have been through something together and understand without needing to say so exactly what that something cost and what it was worth. Thank you, she says, for asking. He knows which question she means. She sees it in his face. He nods. The conductor calls. Clara Ashford picks up her satchel, the same one that came from Boston Corners, repaired with careful stitching, looking exactly as worn as something that has been used honestly, and she walks to the train and she boards it. She finds a window seat. The locomotive begins a long, slow process of accumulating momentum. Through the glass, she watches Harlan Creek diminish the White House on the hill receding into the tree line. The crosshouse sign getting smaller, the station platform, with its handful of people growing distant. Reed is the last thing she can see clearly. He is standing with his hat in his hand, watching the train go, the blue shirt and the brown vest catching the morning light. He does not wave. He does not move. He simply stands there steady and present until the train rounds the first long curve through the pines and Harlan Creek disappears entirely from view. Clara settles back into her seat. The Montana spring opens around the moving train green valleys she did not know existed under the snow that buried everything when she arrived, rivers running bright with snowmelt, the Rockies moving from close and overwhelming to distant and proportionate as the train descends toward the eastern plains. The world is larger than it looked from a house on a hill in winter. It has always been this large. She has simply been in a room with the curtains drawn. She takes the envelope from her coat pocket when the train is 2 hours past Billings. Inside one page reads handwriting economical as everything about him. She reads it. Thomas used to say that the best people he knew were the ones who got knocked down and chose when they got up not to become the thing that knocked them down. He described this quality like it was rare, which I think is true, and like he admired it enormously, which I know is true. I thought for a long time that he was describing something he aspired to. I understand now that he was describing something he had already found in letters he had been exchanging with a woman in Boston who asked real questions and gave real answers and took a chance on the word companion when everything else had closed. I am sorry he did not get to meet you. I believe you would have liked each other very much. She reads it twice. Then she folds it along its original creases and places it inside the cover of the Thoreau that Walter Burns tucked into the top of the book package because her father loved Thoreau, and because this seems like the correct location for the beginning of something. The train moves through the spring country. Clara Ashford, who arrived in Montana in December in a borrowed black dress with $50 in her coat lining, and the careful, load-bearing kind of courage that does not look like courage until you think to look back at it, Clara. Ashford leans her head against the window glass and closes her eyes. She is not afraid of what comes next. She is curious. That turns out to be enough.